We're going to take a look now at my favorite top 4 things to do at the end of a lesson that involves using smart sheets and graphic organizers. And so number 4 are student-led graphic organizer reviews. And so again, this is at the end of the lesson, and this is really after the graphic organizers have been developed. And so what we're going to do here, one is have either story or idea retelling, and that's basically having the students use the information on the graphic as a guide as they basically re-explain the information to a peer or to the group, and students take turns explaining different ideas on the graphic. It's a very simple thing to do, but it's also a very powerful way to facilitate a review. Now, what's really important to remember is the students are using the graphic organizers to retell the information, not the teacher. And so you're not reviewing the information to students or for students. The students are reviewing the information by using the notes on their graphic organizers. Another way of doing student-led reviews are called Q&As. And so what you have students do is analyze the graphic and ask a who, what, when, where, or why type question that can be answered by looking at the graphic organizer. So ask the question and then provide the answer. And then each student takes a turn at asking a different question, who, what, when, where, why, or how, and then explaining the answer based on the information on the graphic. My third choice, down from number 4, is what's called what, so what, pair share procedure. And so basically what I'll do is I'm going to pose 2 or 3 questions, and the first one is, what is the most important idea on your graphic organizer? And you're only allowed to identify one. And so what students have to do is look back over the entire graphic and identify just one idea that they think is the most important. Well, just the process of looking back over it to pick what they thought was the most important is an important review process, because they're thinking about and weighing the various information on the graphic. By only allowing one, it really forces them to prioritize the information and think about it in a personal way. Now, if you have 30 students, you may have 30 different ideas that students pick as their personal number 1. It really doesn't matter which they target as number 1. What's important is they engage in the process of picking out their number 1 and then explaining it. And so the second question is so what? What makes that idea so important? And so they pick out the most important idea, and then they explain why they think that idea was really important. And finally, what they do is they ask what questions could be asked about that idea. And so not only do they target the most important idea and explain why it was important, they also have to provide what are some questions that might be asked about that idea. The second of my top 4, down to number 2, is priority share. I really love this activity. It's similar to the third one, but it's a little more involved. And so, for example, many of the smart sheets have bubbles on them next to the main idea and detailed text boxes. So if you look in these little spaces here, these little blank spaces are the bubbles that I'm talking about. And so, for example, on this one, that would be these bubbles. So, and in this case, you have bubbles for main ideas and then bubbles for details. So basically what happens is, first I'm going to divide the class into teams, and they target just the main ideas. And so the first thing they have to do is decide which of the main ideas were the most important and order them accordingly. And so in this case, there are 2 main ideas, and they have to decide which would be the most important and then the second most important. And of course, if there are 3 main ideas, then it'd be first, second, third choice, etc. So first they're prioritizing main ideas. And this is, again, their opinion. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just which do you think was most important. Now, different types of prompts. One can be most important. One could be most interesting. It could be most confusing. It can be most anything. It's just the key thing is you're getting students to prioritize the information on some level. It can be the funniest. It can be the weirdest, really doesn't matter, just as long as they're prioritizing the information. Then what we're going to have them do is basically do the same thing with the various details associated with each main idea. So for an example, under number 1, there's slow, subtle impact. Then they pick pollution as number 1, fertilizers and pesticides number 2, and then consuming resources number 3. And then do the same thing for the other, each of the other main ideas. And then later on, what they'll do is I will ask students to share which detail did you pick as number 1. Not really asking them to share all of the details in the rankings, but which one did they pick as their most important. Now, sometimes you're just not going to have enough time to do each of the main ideas and all of their details. So what you can do is have students just pick their most important idea and then just rank the details associated with it. So my number 1 for top ways of using graphic organizers at the end of the lesson are what is called essential graphic organizer questions. And this is a type of reflective review. And so in this case, we're not so much reflecting on the content of the lesson, but rather on the tool that was used during the lesson. And in this case, of course, the tool we're focusing on are the use of the smart sheets or the graphic organizers. So for an example, what I want to do is ensure students really are understanding the underlying advantages of the various learning tools like graphic organizers. And I want them to become personally invested in using them to attain their own goals. And so what I'll do is I'll put the class into teams or pairs and have students discuss their responses to one or more of these questions. For an example, why are graphic organizers used so much in my class? In what ways is this particular graphic useful? In what ways is it not all that useful? How do tools like this help you learn? How do they help you be a better reader or better writer or better learner, etc.? Another question is, what are some different situations where this particular graphic might be used? Like, we've been using it for reading. How could you use it for writing? How could you use it for reports, etc.? What are some other classes where you could use a graphic organizer like this? Like, we've been using this 3 main idea in science a lot, but what other classes could you use a graphic like this, and how would you use it there? What are some situations outside of school where you could use a graphic organizer like this? This particular graphic organizer has different parts to it. Which part is the most important? Which is the least important? How would you change this graphic to improve its design? Which part of the graphic are you best at doing? Which is the hardest part of using this graphic organizer, and what makes it hard? So these are examples of various questions. I wouldn't ask all of these questions in any one time, but I might ask at least one at the end of a lesson to get them reflecting on the tool I've been using. And finally, how is this graphic organizer similar or different from other ones you've used? So to sort of recap where we've been on my top 5 lists, at the beginning of a lesson, number 1 is using it as an advanced organizer. Number 2 is reviewing prior learning. Number 3 is using the graphics to pre-teach vocabulary. And then number 4 was to assess background knowledge. In terms of during reading activities, my favorite and probably the most important to begin with is that guided text to graphic organizer notes. And then jigsaw and number heads really come in as ties in terms of being really powerful things to do. Number 4 was read, pair, share to graphic organizers. And finally was give one, take one. And if you remember, that's where we're rotating several graphics during the lesson. And each group is adding one idea to a graphic and then rotating it onto the next group. During writing, number 1 is write about what you're reading and note it on the graphic. Number 2 is providing graphic organizers to accompany essay test questions. And remember, the best ones are going to be partially completed, so you're prompting students what are the key ideas you want them to respond to in the essay question. Number 3 was using them to organize their ideas for written reports, and then likewise using them when making presentations. At the end of a lesson, my first choice was using those essential graphic organizer questions, where I might pose one or more of those questions about the tool they've been learning how to use. Number two was priority share, where they go through and they identify, they rank order the main ideas and details, and then explain why they gave them a particular ranking. Number three was where they pick out one idea that they thought was the most important and explain why it was important and what were key questions associated with that could be asked about it. And number four are student-led graphic organizer reviews, where students are taking a completed graphic and just explaining to their peers particular ideas on it, and or asking the who, what, when, where, and why questions that could be answered on the graphic, and then providing those answers. So if you think back about some of the big ideas about graphic organizer instruction, in these various top 4 or top 5 lists of routines that I've been providing, there's certain characteristics that all of these routines share. One of them is the use of scaffolded instruction, or the gradual release, where you're guiding the process, teaching students how to think about and analyze the information and turn those into bullet statements to note on the graphic and to prioritize the information and so forth. But then eventually moving out of the picture so students learn how to use these independently. Another key characteristic is all of these techniques are designed to maximize student engagement, so they're really actively involved with the instruction as the graphic organizers are being used. We never just use these as handouts without ensuring that students are really engaged in the process. Some key ideas to review about sustained applications. Remember, these should be used across the curriculum. And so not only in different subject areas, such as science and social studies and math and language arts, but also in different kinds of assignments, such as writing and reading and project-based learning and that sort of thing. Keep in mind that you need to use these at least twice weekly. More is better. And finally, it's important that students realize that the graphic organizers and using them is actually part of the curriculum. That they'll be evaluated on the quality of graphics they produce, that you're using rubrics to evaluate those graphic organizers. And the outcomes of those evaluations actually are part of their grade, so students learn to take these graphics seriously.